Alright, you guys, welcome back to Reignited and our Twin Charge Magnum project. Now, as much as I wish I could say that we are continuing on with our fabrication, unfortunately we have a problem that we need to address before we move forward, and this one is entirely self-inflicted. Now, of course, this is a problem that some of you could have seen coming, but for myself, even though I knew it was there, I just had my usual attitude of everything is going to be fine, and it most definitely was not fine. Let me explain what's going on here. Now, as you may or may not be aware, your engine has what's called a reluctor wheel, or also known as a tone wheel or trigger wheel, for the crankshaft. Now, this is how your position sensor reads the position of the crankshaft to know when to fire the injectors, all of that sort of thing. Now, this actually bolts to the back of the crankshaft itself. Now, there's a difference between the early style Hemi engines and the later style Hemi engines. The early style uses this 34 tooth trigger wheel here. Now, the key is that the more teeth that tone wheel has on it, the more refined that signal can be. It can be more precise about exactly where in the stroke this crankshaft is at. Now, on the really modern day engines, these have become ever more complex and have gotten away from the tooth wheel style design entirely. Now, all of these trigger wheels are magnetic and they are infinitely more precise than these older wheels are, but these still definitely get the job done. Now, as you may know from watching previous episodes of this project, I have a later style engine in this car, somewhere between a 15 to a 17 5.7 Hemi, and that has the later style reluctor wheel with a finer tooth resolution on it. Now, I knew that going into it, but here was my reasoning. Now, on my C10 that has a 392 Hemi in it, I am running a Holley Terminator setup on there, and it is fully adjustable. It's a full standalone system, and one of the things I can change in there is the trigger wheel settings. Now, on this particular vehicle, I was planning on going with HP tuners, and I'll give you some more reasons on that in a moment. But my thought was, without actually looking into it, was that HP tuners should have the same sort of capability as far as changing reluctor wheel settings in the tune. I never followed through on checking that. I just assumed that that was true, put the engine together, put it in the car. Here we are, a couple months later, I'm actually ordering the HP tuner setup, and I'm thinking, okay, I should really probably verify this. And so I sent them an email. They were very quick to get back to me and inform me that no, in fact, they cannot change reluctor wheel settings in the tune. So that is indeed a problem. I do appreciate them getting back to me as soon as they did, though. So what is our solution now? What are we going to have to do to try to fix this issue? Now, your first inclination might be, hey, just swap the reluctor wheel from the original engine that was in the car, which happens to be this one right here, and transfer it to this new engine right here. And I wish it were, in fact, that simple. However, they do have a different bolt pattern design. These older engines have a 3-bolt pattern on the reluctor wheel. The newer engines have a 4-bolt pattern on that reluctor wheel. Now, I was trying to figure out some different options, some different ways to go. However, I did find a seller on eBay who he sells the older style 32 tooth reluctor wheel with a 4-bolt style bolt-up design. I'm hoping that this will work. I don't know, but this is the sort of thing I do for you guys. I try to just verify everything so that when you go to do these types of swaps, you know if this stuff will work or not. Now, as we proceed through this, if this one does in fact work for this application, I will absolutely go ahead and list his contact information in the description down below so you can do this same exact thing. So let's talk real quick about why I went with HP tuners on this particular build. Now, I know you guys have heard me talk about the Holley Terminator system before on my C10. I love it, it's fantastic, so user-friendly and so programmable that you can change almost everything on there. It is a really, really good system, available for a fairly decent price as well. It's definitely gone up here since I bought mine, but I think it's still absolutely worth the money if that's what you want to do. So why am I not going with a Holley system on this particular build? Well, it's because the Hemi engine came factory in this car already. Now, I believe if you're doing a Hemi swap, like standalone into a vehicle that never had a Hemi in it, I think a Holley is absolutely the way to go. However, with this car, because it already has the Hemi engine in there, everything already talks to each other, right? Like all the interior gauges all work, the transmission works correctly along with the engine. So I don't need to change the entire engine management system. I just need to be able to program what's currently there. So that's why I went with the HP tuners, because if I put a Holley in there, it would run the engine just fine, but I would have to find another system for actually running the transmission, and none of the interior gauges would work. So it kind of ruined the functionality of the vehicle. So again, I just thought it made a lot more sense to go with HP tuners on this build. Time will tell if that's true or not. Now, of course, as you might imagine, this is not the ideal scenario because I now have to remove that engine that I just put together out of the Magnum and completely disassemble it to get that reluctor wheel swapped over. Now, I am going to try to cheat it just a little bit and leave the cylinder heads on and just flip it and try to pull the crank out the bottom. It's still a lot of work, but obviously it must be done if we're going to actually make this thing work. I don't want to try to move back to using the older style engine for this project. I want to stay with the new style engine. There's just too many advantages that come along with that. So I'm really hoping that this is going to work out. Now, one thing you want to remember too is that the crankshaft is not the only thing that has a reluctor wheel on it. There's also the camshaft on these things. And there's obviously a significant difference when you go from the engine that does not have VVT to the ones that do have VVT. So let me explain about the camshaft reluctor wheel next. So here are your camshaft sprockets here between the pre-VVT and the post-VVT. Now this one obviously has a camshaft phaser in it, so it can actually adjust your timing a little bit. This one does not. Now they are not a direct swap between the two of these things. One of the biggest differences is that the actual sprocket gear itself is much thinner on the new VVT style, meaning that the timing chain itself is thinner. I'm assuming that they were trying to reduce rotating mass because they just introduced a ton of it with this new sprocket, because this thing is easily twice as heavy as this, if not even more. So it's a bulky piece. So I imagine that's why they actually made that a little bit thinner. They decided that, hey, we didn't need that timing chain to be quite as beastly as it was. Again, I don't really see timing chain failures on Hemis. It does happen from time to time, but I have to say that I've only ever seen one in person in 12 years of working as a Dodge tech. So again, it's just not that common. But as to what we're talking about in this video, can you use a 2009 and later engine in a pre-2009 vehicle? Now, as regards to camshaft reluctor wheels themselves, these holes right here are essentially what it's reading. Instead of teeth like it has on the crankshaft reluctor wheel, it's reading these holes. Now, the relation of the holes to each other is different on these camshaft sprockets as far as in or out, but that's just based on different timing covers. So as long as you use the correct timing cover for the engine that you have, that camshaft sensor should line up correctly with the holes in this reluctor wheel. Now, I did some closer inspection, and the great news here is that all of these holes are exactly in relation to each other between the 09 and later and the pre-2009. What this means is that your pre-2009 vehicle software should run a 2009 and up engine without issue as far as it regards to the camshaft itself. Now, one thing to note here is that you will not be able to take advantage of the VVT function because your stock vehicle software does not have that in it. But again, that's the theory behind it. Now I just have to put this engine all together and prove it to you guys. Now again, kind of sad here that I'm gonna go through all of this work just to correct something that I very easily could have emailed HP tuners about several months ago when I started building this engine, and I would have solved the problem at that time. I didn't, I assumed. That's on me. So let's go ahead and get this thing fixed, make this thing work. As I said, I'm gonna try to cheat this thing a little bit by not having to remove the heads, remove the pistons and rods from the engine, all of that. We do have to remove the whole front timing cover assembly, obviously the oil pan, all of that. And I'm gonna try to pull the crankshaft out of the bottom without removing the pistons and rods, which I just did that with the other engine over there just to see if it was possible when I was checking out the other reluctor wheel. So there's nothing left to do it but to do it. Let's tear into this thing. Not exactly what I was expecting. This crankshaft does actually have the 3-bolt style flange for the tone wheel. So it looks like I can actually just use the one I took off the original engine that came out of this. That is what I am hoping. I believe that is the case. I'm gonna go ahead and get this crank pulled out right now. We'll unbolt it from there. Hopefully this one bolts right into place and we can start putting everything back together again. Very nice. Perfect. Okay, so just a little bit of concern here is that it looks like this tone wheel does actually bolt to this crankshaft, but of course the question is it actually in the correct orientation? Now the bolts are staggered in such a way that you can't bolt them up incorrectly, but because we are changing from one style to another, I'm just not 100% sure that this reluctor wheel is in the exact same orientation as that one. It should be, but I don't really know. The second thing is that the weight is going to be just slightly different with this tone wheel because it is a slightly different shape on the inside. And what that means is that the weight will be slightly off. So when this crankshaft is spinning around, it probably won't be as perfectly balanced as it was originally. Now, really the correct thing to do would be to take this crank to a machine shop and have it balanced after installing this reluctor wheel. Am I gonna do that? No. No, I'm not going to do that. So let's go ahead and get this thing bolted on, start getting this engine back together. Honestly, the weight being different, I'm not spinning this thing to 8,500 RPM. I think it's gonna be close enough.
Much of a difference.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be close enough. And these main bearing caps, if you look at them, like these are beefy as all get out. I really don't see this thing getting out of hand, you know? There's some situations where I'd be like, no, I need to take care of this, but honestly, I'm not that worried about it. But it is something that people on the internet will freak out about. So I'm waiting for that. You're crazy! Yeah. That'll never work!
Rattle right out of the car.
You're gonna toss that crank right out the bottom of that thing.
Yep.
And I'll be like, if I do, it's because I have a supercharger and a turbocharger on it, not because my tone wheel isn't balanced. Yeah. You know, standard machine shop refrain. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we'll get to it as soon as we can, you know, probably about 4 months, you know. Which is kind of funny because you're like, people don't really use machine shops anymore, so how in the world are you so far behind?
Yeah. They're just so used to it from years ago, they just never changed that. That's the mentality.
They just don't want to give any sort of ETA whatsoever at all. And what's funny is they'll always do this too, where they're like, oh yeah, you know, I might be able to get to it in about a month or so, you know. And then a day later, they're like, it's all done. Exactly. and you're like, you're supposed to be excited because it's all done, but it's like, dude, you could have just been a bit more accurate. I wouldn't have held you to it.
Some ballpark here.
Yeah, I wouldn't have held you to it and say that, oh, you said it'd be done, but you know, I get it. People on the internet are always obsessed about torquing everything properly too.
Right.
Got it.
55 foot-pounds right there.
Click. Click. Another way you can tell that the crank is actually seated correctly is that all the bolts went down really smooth and just went whop right to a hard stop.
Yep.
If they'd gone down and gone, then you kind of know it's all crossed up in there. So as you guys saw, we got most of the engine back together yesterday. Now, if you notice, I went ahead and just put the rod caps back on and just ran the bolts down real quick. The reason for that is because I was actually going to be replacing the connecting rod cap bolts with a set of new ones, because these bolts are in fact torque to yield bolts, and Chrysler recommends replacing them if you ever take them off. So that's exactly what we're gonna do. So let's get these bolts on. So just like that, we have our new rod bolts installed and all torqued down. This engine is basically ready to go. I know I've said that before, but hopefully right now, this engine is ready to go. Very excited about the swap on our tone wheel here. I believe that's going to work just fine. We're gonna find out once I actually try to fire this thing up. Now, as for what I'm doing right now, I can't put the oil pan back on just yet because I do have that turbo, so I'm going to have an oil drain line that comes back to the oil pan itself. I ordered a weld-on aluminum bung for the pan, so that'll be here in just a couple of days. I can get the hole drilled for that and get that bung installed. Then I can put the pan back on and get this thing back in the vehicle. But unfortunately, all of that is going to have to wait until the next episode. I apologize, you guys. I understand this is a very slow-moving project right now. A lot of moving parts to it and trying to figure things out. But again, to me, that's most of the fun of this, is understanding what's going to work, what's not going to work. And sometimes you run up against a wall that's of your own making. And so that was my fault on this one. But still, I'm excited about the future of this thing. Let me know what you guys think about it. We'll see you next time on Reignited.